shit off my chest though. But is we clear? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, so I call this one right here "Done by Design," right? Because really, just to break it down to people who got a problem understanding, like they always got something. You got people who got something to say about how we respond or how we even look at ourselves. So I'm looking at it like, okay, how is it so hard for the world to understand that is the people that's been, we've been titled, we've been labeled, we've been coined, we've been coded and even identified as black people, right? That in fact that we that we are autochthonous, right? Globally, which means that we everywhere. And so the big misconception is when it comes to the masses, right, of these undereducated people, even undereducated scholars of nature and biological comprehension. So when you have what we refer to as, or what they refer to as black people, which most of us are 99% shades of brown beings, right? But we either recognize or unrecognize as aboriginals, indigenous, natives, Moors, Mer, etc., right? So it's always an opinion. Let me go ahead and hold on. But like I'm saying, it's always an opinion by like a bias-minded, somebody that's bias-minded, who stem from like a group of people that's heavily misinformed, miseducated, and misaligned because they racist and stereotypical. They come from generations of that. So it's easy to have debates on information that's been blanketed, shadowed, hidden, lost, misplaced, misrepresented, and misidentified. You feel what I'm saying?
Right.
So check this out. Now, those who wrote the narrative, they might say something like, most likely they'll be like, okay, well, biologically speaking, because that's the type of people we dealing with. They might say, biologically speaking, there was no moment where other races didn't exist. Now, I'm not the type of person that's going to just overshadow your information, but in a sense, that's a piece of the truth, because when it comes to all of us coming from, now look at it on a scientific level, right? When we ain't talking about no religion or nothing like that. When it comes to a scientific thing, this is the science. When it comes to the scientific level, you got to look at it like all of us coming from one family, one humanity, right? And that don't begin with separate races, so I can understand where they come from. But the concept of race, that's only recent. That's something that then came, we know about it in informal classification about a few hundred years ago. So we know that biology, it don't divide us, into these separated or segregated or discrete races, but people do that. So it describes populations. We know that we had gradually adapted to environments over a long period of times. So when we say that, let's talk about real timelines. You feel me, fam? You with me? Okay, so we gotta look at the real origin of people. Like today's Homo sapiens, right? We know from the story of what we've been taught about 300,000 years ago. We know to understand, even when we look at people who done their fossil work or recovery from bones and stuff like that, geneticists and all that, we understand if you're looking at places like Jebel Irhad, which is Morocco, right? You understand about 300,000 years ago, or Omo Kabish, which is Ethiopia. About 230,000 years ago, you start to understand that it showed that anatomically we had people, what they called the modern people, was already present in Africa on the continent, right? So that's we take that about something where about like 200, maybe even probably like 250,000 years, right? So people lived entirely in Africa for that long period before the major migrations or the Great Migration had happened. We know from what we've been taught that was 60 to 70,000 years, right? So from what we understand, that's not a myth. That's genetic. When we start to see that the genetics come with what we say about the archaeological structure coming together with fossils and all that, it all line up. So now we got to understand, for those who too far gone on the ignorant path, we got to put them somewhere where they get an understanding. You start to understand when and how an individual variety was created, like groups of people. So understand that when those groups of people migrated out of Africa, some of them moved into those colder climates. We talking about Europe, because the first people in Europe was African, black people. Talk about Central Asia. Then you look at in East Asia, you know what I'm saying? And don't ever forget about Oceania. So later migrations of people, they arrived in Americas, and we know that because we got proof that those people showed up about 20,000 years ago, right? So, but they skin tone, they facial structure, and all that, the visible difference that developed like gradually over tens of thousands of years. And that all comes from what we know as that UV radiation, right? The levels of UVA for the UV radiation, to climate change, to our diet, to genetic flow. It was all adaptation. So,
Right.
and here go the most important part that people miss, fam. You with me?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay, genetically, all people today are what they call 99.9% identical. So that's the adaptation we call race. So that's the little surface thing that's where we put the bridge in for adaptation, and that's something on top of on something. That's the layers. Now, no matter who you are and whether you like it or not, humanity that began as one dark-skinned population. And that was in Africa before the differentiation. Now, this is widely consistent with the evolutionary biology, right? So, darker skin is the ancestral human trait because people evolved under strong equatorial sun exposure. You get what I'm saying? And then the lighter skin adaptations, that came later in regions that had low UV exposure. You get what I'm saying? Low UV radiations. Now, those that write or wrote the narrative might suggest that it was never a time when one group existed alone for millions of years and then just suddenly appeared. But I personally agree to disagree, because although that we know the human race is continuously evolving through lineage, right? We know that modern people started in Africa 300,000 years ago. We know that for 200,000 years plus, people lived only in Africa. And then we know about that major migration, right? That global disperse. That happens anywhere from 60 to 70,000 years ago. And that's what we call races that develop like gradually over tens of thousands of years of migration. So looking at that category of what we call race, right? That's what we put it in context. It's a rigid category where it's socially constructed, right? And it's not biologically discrete. But the thing is, you got to look at mitochondrial Eve, right? Or you got to look at the Y chromosome atom. That's when we see that it's not only just man and woman alive. They're not the only man and woman that's alive at that time. So they are what scientists and all this we refer to as the most recent common ancestors from those who was living, all the people that's living today. So we inherited this specific genetic lines. That's where you get the two different genetic pathways, like two different timelines, though. That's what don't make sense to people, like how that makes sense. Well, you got to understand it's the same species, because mitochondrial Eve is the name that was given to the woman's whose mitochondrial DNA was shared by all the people, or is shared by all the people today. And that's where we get mtDNA, and it's passed on only like from a mom to the child, so from a mother to a child, and then it mutates slowly, and sometimes what they say is predictably, because you got scientists that can trace it back like a genetic pattern. Say like if I left a little paper trail, it'll be like a genetic paper trail. So we looking at the estimated age of that is anywhere from 150 to 200,000 years ago. That's when people lived in Africa. So this the key point. She wasn't alone, right? So you already know mitochondrial Eve wasn't alone. She lived amongst thousands of other women. So her lineage simply didn't die out. While other lineages died out, hers didn't. That's what make it the strong point that we making right here. And think of it like this, Sam. Let me put it this way. Back in them times and back in them days, and even long times ago, like even hundreds of years ago, you had a whole bunch of last names that was there that's not there today. Only few of them survived. You get what I'm saying? So when we go to Y chromosomal atom, that's the most recent man from all the living men that inherit the Y chromosome. You feel me? Because the Y chromosome, it passes on from a father to a son. That's different from the mtDNA, which is the mother chromosome. So although it's traceable through these mutations and these patterns, that's what we do. No matter where you move us, as the original man, the aboriginal, the indigenous man, we move around and we are able to pigment, and all these things come from Africa. So it's important to know that he didn't necessarily live at the same time as mitochondrial Eve. So their timelines overlap, right? Big time. That's why you got to look at it like it was separated by generations. And again, he wasn't the first man. He was just the most recent paternal ancestor whose lineage that has survived. You feel what I'm putting down real quick? All right, so check this out. That means that people, right, we trace genetically to Africa, right? So it was a large population that was not too there was not two isolated individuals. We talk about family trees that disappeared over time, right? Then we look at it like how survival, it started to change. It shaped the ancestry, because those are the people who survived to keep the lineages going. So every time these discoveries, they align with what we find or what they have found as scientists to be the ones who do the geneticists and fossils from 300,000 years ago. We know about the Homo sapiens, but the thing that people don't think about is the fact that both of the deepest maternal and paternal genetic lineages, or the lines, they come from or started in Africa. That's the most powerful thing right there. That's what we know, that's what you call the motherland, right? Because it birthed all these people that went other places. So we have to explain why people get upset or use their ignorance and say, well, how can y'all be Moors? How can y'all be Hebrews? How can y'all be the real Indians, the real this? How can y'all be all over? Well, look at us in Australia and all these other places. You got to understand about the mutation clock. So that's how this works, because the engine behind everything that we just talked about, scientists use what's called a molecular clock, okay? That's where the DNA mutate at almost a predictable rate. But it happened over generations. You see what I'm saying? It's like small imitating thoughts happen when a cell duplicate, right? And we've been taught that most of our cells is neutral and it don't affect survival. But the mutations build up slowly over time. So that's how you start to see us changing into these other races, climate, when we're in these different places, different patterns and all that, it happens through that structure. So what we know about the typical mutation is like the rate per generation, right? The number of the genetic differences between populations, we can estimate how long ago that we shared a common ancestor. That's what it makes so much sense for a mind that can pick up the pattern and see what's going on. We understand that they rectified the clock, right? They didn't just guess, you know what I mean? They secured the clock by using this radiometrically. They dated like fossils and stuff like that. But you got to understand that the ancient DNA samples is what tell us that we have Denisovans, that we have Neanderthals. So we look at the archaeological stuff that's on top of this stuff with the known ages, and they compare it with the mutation differences between lineages and what was calculated. They even calculated it backwards. So it was math on top of biology on top of geology. So that's why we estimate that the range is somewhere between 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, and it's probabilistic. So it's not mystical. You got to look at why mitochondrial Eve and why chromosomal Adam, the dates don't match perfectly. This is where people get it twisted. They assume that if that was the first woman and that was the first man, shouldn't they live at the same time? No. The thing is, because they was what we using as the models, they represent different genetic pathways. You start to look at mitochondrial Eve, and that track only to the maternal line, right? And then when you look at Y chromosomal Adam, that track only to the paternal line, because the lineage die out at a different rate. So you gotta look at it like, for example, a man with only daughters, right? He ends his Y lineage. That man don't have no sons, so that ends the chromosomal lineage for him having a son for another man born under him. So if a woman who her daughters don't have no children, that ends her mtDNA line. So over these tens of thousands of years, you got entire branches of family that just vanished. And the most recent common ancestor for one pathway could easily be older or younger than the other. It's survival math. It's not about, you know what I'm saying, how we sexually or romantically coupled with each other. We're talking about cultural and historical meaning. And then we get to the scientific part, because scientifically, all living people descend from the African populations, whether you these racist people or anybody else like it or not. That means that the deepest maternal line is African. That means that the deepest paternal line is African. We look at skin pigmentation all over again. It originally evolved under equatorial sun. So if you look at it under the equatorial sun, culturally, this means that for centuries, right? What you call European colonies, They narrative push the ideas of hierarchy and separate origins, but genetics killed that. Genetics killed all that bigotry through or what you got to say about who you think you are. Genetics tell the truth. We are the one species with regional adaptation, okay? That's who we are. So the group that we're talking about is older in species, and no group is pre-human. And we ain't talking about nobody else being like, you could bring up all the little extraterrestrials or whatever you want to bring, whatever, but we keeping it on the scientific level, you know what I mean? The basis of what's understood. Ain't nobody appeared separately is what they can go ahead and put into there and equating to it, but you got to look at it like this is diversified. It changes gradually. Now, here's the most powerful part, right? Or one of the powerful parts. The visible traits we argue about today, right? That's just like, I'm gonna say it's a surface level argument that's just put on top of a shared African foundation. So biology, it don't support that. It don't support that racial superiority myth. It don't support none of that stuff that's coming with all that. I don't care if you black or white or whatever coming with that racist or whatever. It don't support that. You got to look at the science. You got to look at the biology. It's all about what supported is the shared ancestry and the environmental adaptation. So we talk about another field of this, fam, is genetic blockages and how they manipulated, like, all around the world, the diversity, right? A genetic block happens when a population is drastically reduced in size. And so we can have fewer people, which lead on to fewer genes that's passed on. So then we have less genetic variations. So we start to see that it change up a little bit, all right? But then think of it like if you was trying to put a whole bunch of river, like if you was trying to put all the water of a river into a bucket, it wouldn't happen. What would come out is only of a little bit of the water that flowed, because that's all you can fit in that bucket. That's why you heard about things like the Toba super eruption. Now, around about what they say, 74,000 years ago, it was a big old volcano eruption, right? And when that happened, in what we know today as Indonesia, it was researchers that suggested that, hey, all right, this could have reduced like the world population dramatically, but it could have went down to a few thousand that was breeding, you know what I mean, or probably even because you got other scientists that's gonna debate stuff. You get what I'm saying? So they talk about, all right, well, the genetic evidence shows that around this time, you know, people experience what they was calling a bottleneck population or whatever. But here's the key about that. Most of these people that show most non-African people, they descend from a real small group that left Africa around 70,000 years ago. You know what I mean? So that's where you get parts of what we call, like, people identify as a Native American. Because to be honest with you, a Native American was somebody who made it or migrated out of Africa, and they went through the Siberian Strait. They made their way into Asia. They lived into Asia for a while, and then they came out of Asia and found their ways into Mexico, Central America, and South America. And those are what you call Native Americans. But that just goes to rectify the out of Africa, the founder effect. So when you get small groups that migrate and they settle into these new lands, their genes become amplified is what it is, because if you're using the founder effect, you got to look at a small group that moved into the north. They moved into colder climates, okay? They had lower UV exposure right there. So with that group, the lighter skin, they start to mutate. Let's just keep it real. And they need help with that vitamin D absorption. So this is where the traits become more common over the generations, because they steady producing the same stuff that is more likely of the ones who lost their pigmentation. So you're producing more of the lighter skins and more, you know what I mean, you produce more of the lighter pigments. And that's where they, you know what I'm saying, they had that advantage of living in that environment. Now, over thousands of years, we know that people in Europe came out with lighter skin because that's where they moved into the cold. So that's where you get all that. It kept breeding the same way. We got to make this make sense for people who too ignorant to understand it or don't want to to pick up a book, or don't want to get the oral tradition, or don't want to pay attention to the science. Now you start to understand that even in the Arctic, right, you start to look at the fat, the metabolism shifted, okay? Because in the cold, it's going to be different, like diets and stuff like that. Look at high altitude. You start looking at the oxygen that's passing through Tibet, through the Andes. Now, beneath all that, you got people that still got shared ancestry. Now, here's the hardest part about people accepting the truth. From a genetic standpoint, right? The more the genetic variation that's within Africa, then between Europe and Asia combined, it's more within Africa is more differences. And that's just in Africa, just to show you that how powerful that is. That's how two random Africans, right, can be more genetically different from each other than either from a European. That's how deep Africa's lineage run, right? So when we start to compare with people who don't understand these things or even overstand these things, which is the strengthening part, we understand that the racial categories, they don't have to line up on your map only in genetics. That's because it's wide, you know what I'm saying? It's a social classification that's on top of ancient biology that continues, right? So when we put that into perspective, you got to understand, what did those blockages do? You know what I mean? What did those genetic blockages do? When they didn't receive what they naturally have, they decreased the diversity that was outside of Africa, and it intensified because certain traits was isolated in certain regions. So you got to think about how, you know what I'm saying, this created the illusion that the difference or the differences that truly exist, because they didn't create separate species, you know what I mean? They didn't create no separate origins or none of that. That's just what they would like to try to run with that. But let's just keep it right here. The family tree for people, for humanity, that stayed is like one continuous branch that kept spreading out, you know what I mean? It all came from the same root. So when people started to reach these other continents, right? We talk about like today's Homo sapiens, you know, the modern people. You got to look at it like that originated right in Africa. We said 300,000 years ago. We said 70,000 years ago was the Great Migration and all that. So that was to break that down and build it up for those that didn't understand. But then it became a migration story that was it was written, it was documented, it was told across coastlines, deserts, and even the ice. So in Australia, we look at in Australia 65,000 years ago in Australia. That's how you get the Africans. You see, I know you seen Africans in Australia. You seen Australians that's dark as us, right? You seen some that's even darker than us. So that means that they traveled along those coastal lines of Asia, right? That means they crossed over into the open water. That's when the sea levels was even lower. So they navigated on purpose, okay? It was intentional. It wasn't no accidental drifting or none of that stuff. So when you start to see the part about Australia, that's when you start to understand about the larger part of the landmass of Sahul. You start to understand that took early navigation capabilities. You needed to know how to move around. Then you look at remains at Lake Mungo, and you know what I'm saying? That right there, that confirmed that it was already inhabited for a long time. So that make the Aboriginal Australians among the longest continuous cultural lineages on the earth. You see what I'm saying? And then you look at Europe. We expanded into Europe about 45,000 years ago before Europe became predominantly white. We expanded into there. So people entered Europe, and we came in there about, like I said, 45,000 years ago. And what they saw, what they encountered was a different being, which is the Neanderthals that was already there. So from all those rough ice climates, you know what I'm saying, for several thousand years, you got people and Neanderthals that's overlapping. They start breeding. That's when you get the interbreeding going on. So that's why those ones who are many people that are non-Africans or whatever, they carry about that 2%. They carry up to about 2% of that Neanderthal DNA. And they'll say that, or what we know scientifically is that eventually, you know what I'm saying, the Neanderthal DNA had we can say the Neanderthals had disappeared, you know what I mean, or about 40,000 years ago. But now, not necessarily was they like exterminated, it was just like a mix, you know what I mean, because most we looking at like like the common things that happened there was like climate stress or competition that was going on between them, and plus they started to, like I said, they started to interbreed. Then look at East Asia about 40,000 years ago. People spread into East Asia then. So then that's when we came across another group. You know what I'm saying? So the archaic group that we look at is the Denisovans. And we start to look at that, okay, you start to look at all these Melanesians, right? And then some of these East Asians, they carry that same Denisovan DNA. So not to take that away, it don't separate the creation. They still sharing that same branch of history. Then we speed this thing a little further and we work our way to the Americas, right? So that's about 15 to 20,000 years ago. You see that people reached the Americas later. And this evidence that we know from that is that it was even a little bit earlier, possibly earlier than that, because they crossed into the Bering Land Ridge, right? That's where we talked about the sea levels being lower and all that, right? So they flowed across those, and even the coastal routes. So you look at the Clovis culture, and that was what, 13,000 years ago. So once in time, that was where they had they first taught, like, this was the older sites, but they now exist. So that's where you see what they call these Native Americans. They descend from the Siberian, from the East Asian populations who migrated during the last ice age. So when they got up out of the last ice age, they was in Siberia. So they lived there, and then they went to East Asia. They lived there for thousands of years before they started moving around and found their way to Mexico. And that's why you get those people who are Native American, who look Mexican, who look Asian, because they are a combination of all of those things from the ancestors that they have, passing on these genetic features, these genetic traits that go along. That's why this timeline, it proved that people began in Africa. The human population, humanity, all this, it comes from small migrating groups, right? We all shaped it. Everybody shaped it by moving around. We shaped the world and with what we call diversity and all difference, because the interbreeding with the archaic people or this added all kinds of stuff that was complex to the understanding of people who they're not physically or mentally there in the mind to understand that it ain't no continent that show evidence of just like today's people origin by itself, because it's all came from us migrating. You get what I'm going with that? All right, so it's hard for people to understand that how could we be these people that's all around. Okay, so if you looking at it like it gotta be looked at it, so say a test found out that we was here before those 12,000 years, right? And you gotta look at how this you got people that's archaeologists, they not arguing. They're not arguing about it. They don't have no point to arguing about it. You got the mass of people that's arguing about it because they undereducated, they misinformed. They the ones who got this, a racist clause inside of them. They stereotypical, they bigots. They come from a long line of that. So it's hard for them to break that. But if you look at it like this, they use this, what they refer to as like a no excuses toolkit, right? So that's where they was leading on the method that they didn't care about nobody's opinions. What they was doing, I know you done heard of radiocarbon dating. They was doing that. They was using organic remains. They was using stratigraphy. That's when they used this on top of what's above and what's below. So that's just material and all that. So you look at microware, you get the residue. You get to find out the analysis on that. And then you see that what tools they had. Look at ancient DNA, the populations that's moving and mixing. Then you got that paleo environment. That's the climate context. That was what was even, possible. So the part that's not easy for people to swallow, the uncomfortable truth is that there ain't no evidence that nothing happened. How you gonna be mad that nothing happened? Yeah, sea levels was rising and all that at that last ice age and all that, but pay attention to how it was breaking down to build up. It was coastal sites that's underwater, so people come from all these complicated, complex, earlier than we assume type of civilization. So we don't need to look through that. We don't need to look for that through somebody's conversation or being mad. The best example would be like Göbekli Tepe. That's Turkey now. So the monumental stones, right? Where you got the circles that was built by the predator collectors or what they call hunter gatherers, right? This was pre-pottery that they found in the Neolithic period that dated around what? I don't know. Was it 9,600 years ago, something like that, BCE, before the Common Era? So what that proves is that the monumental architecture still it can appear before, you know what I'm saying, cities and rituals and social coordination. That's how people start to see how this all add up, this scale up. Then you got so many people that's mad about shit like that. Look at how in Mexico they got what they call the white sands, right? White sands is the footprints that they found that came from over 21 or 23,000 years ago, right? So if all this is put down in science, there's nothing to debate. There's nothing to debate that we was already moving around. Heavy footprints took in these white sands, heavy footprints. These is people that's traveling, migrating. And we ain't talking about migrating for a little bit at a time. We talking about people that's migrating for hundreds of years, even thousands. People still migrating to this day. You get what I'm saying? Still migrating. You got people who be thinking about like migration as a myth because you got bogus writing systems, people that documented stuff how they wanted to document it or whatever, but we still have real documented stories. We got oral stories that's been going around for tens of thousands of years. We got catastrophic things that happen. We talking about floods, volcanoes, you know what I mean, hard winters and all that happened when the ice had collapsed and everything. So you got to take the memory that happened over the millenniums. We're not looking for lies. We're looking for the transformation. You look at the global flood pattern. In Mesopotamia, we had the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Hebrew Bible, we had Noah. In India, we had Manu. In the indigenous America, we had flood traditions here as well. So don't it start to add up, that it's something that make more sense than what these people got to argue about that's not even it's not even lining up. They don't have a timeline when they argue. You arguing with somebody who can't even give you history. You arguing with somebody who can't break down science or biology. Somebody who don't even know nothing about calculating something about a clock. We arguing with somebody who don't even have the brain capacity to do nothing but repeat stuff that they hear on social media or something that they heard somebody who they thought was kicking game say. So now that you got a whole argument going on, and you find out that a bunch of these people that you arguing with, they ain't done no research. They ain't done no type of research. They can't even get into it. They can't get into it because I don't know if they don't have the time to pick up a book. I don't know if they don't have the time to find out what happened in Mesoamerica, what happened in Asia, what happened in Southeast Asia, what happened in Africa. I don't know if they just want to be those that want to, come up with a bunch of myth about something that predate their memory or something like that. It's because, for one, people want to be sense makers, and people are sense makers. But what we have to do is realize that it's myths, okay, that's been preserved and stuff like that. We talk about real climate events, stuff that happened, real disasters, real cultural collapses. And when stuff is encoded symbolically, that's when science strip away all the bullcrap. You know what I mean? So we looking at symbolism and we ask these questions like, okay, what kind of evidence support this? Like that, and I ain't just talking about you running to an internet forum, and I'm not just talking about you running to somebody that you know that already studied this for you. No, do the research yourself and start to see what adds up, and start to see where the math is math, and start to see where it came from. Because I know I'm breaking down this to build it up. I know I'm giving you facts. That's what a lot of people want to do. They want to find a way to have a conversation about some stuff that you just totally unaware about it, okay? So, and to say that, there's people that can say things, don't get me wrong, right? People can say like, okay, now we already know that we got a government and information that we can't trust, but let's look at it like this. It's easy, and when I say it's easy to say that it's a group that's above us, that's operating, that's a united group that's controlling science, that decide to say what is true and suppress what is not, right? But the fact is that everybody don't agree about everything, especially scientists, right? So in many areas, you're gonna find out that it's messy. You're gonna find out that the reason that this is the only shit that they agree on. When we're talking about in America, we're talking about India, Japan, we're talking about China, we're talking about Germany, we're talking about Brazil, South Africa, all these people that's publishing this research Okay, and the places that I like to, you know what I'm saying, delve to check these things out. You got private labs that's competing with others and competing with public universities. So all this research, they fight over these grants and these prestige and these theories. So it's no, it's not. You can't say it's a global council that's coordinated with these right here. They might receive certain incentives, but they not receiving incentives to all come together on this, because this is why I'm gonna show you that division, yeah, is real. But what make that all out story, like the storyline, the control part is real complicated, because power can shape the funding. Okay, power can shape the media. Power can shape education, but what's happening is, even though we know they can shape which topics come out, like what we gonna talk about, what's highlighted. They can shape what controversies and what agendas get pushed. But that same power, they gotta go through a hell of a lot in order to coordinate some damn DNA manipulation across hundreds of thousands of labs, fam. So that would mean they gotta silence every damn geneticist that's up and coming, that's already been in the field for too many damn years. That means they gotta kill or get rid of all of the whistleblowers, because we know we come from people will tell some shit. People will snitch, you get what I'm saying? So just to make somebody else, they gotta do all that just to make somebody else racist ass comfortable. You get what I'm saying? And for those of y'all who still don't get it, I'm gonna break this down for you. I'm gonna build this and break it down and whatever. I'm gonna put it together for you. Imagine you got this big old jug, and I ain't talking about no small jug like a keg, okay? A big old keg or jug full of purple Kool-Aid or Gatorade, whatever you want to look at it. I know y'all like it, but anyway, keep it on this level. Imagine you got it full of this purple Kool-Aid, and then around you, you got, say, 21 cups. 21 cups. And each of these cups got a different amount of water in them. Now, we're going to start with the first cup, okay? The first cup only got a little water in it, so you add a lot of Kool-Aid in it to fill it up. And it only got that little bit amount of water in it. And then so on all the way until you get to that last cup. The last cup get the smallest amount. So it's only a drop left out of that jug or that keg or whatever. It's just a drop. Something you would squeeze into a syringe and you drop it into it, okay? And you still got this big old cup that's full of water. Okay, to the person that's examining it or even tasting, it'll be completely unnoticeable. It'll be unrecognizable, but still, it wouldn't change the fact that that cup got a drop of that purple Kool-Aid in it. You get what I'm saying? And for those who don't understand that, let me give you one more example. For those who argue with the scientific theory of having one woman spread DNA, or spread DNA throughout the whole world. Don't worry. I want you to know, it's many people, including myself. I don't like sharing my granny. So how you think we feel about sharing our greatest grandparent?